Hi, Michael. Hi, Puma. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have two wonderful poets with us today, Michael Lally and Puma Pearl. Puma will read first. Puma Pearl is a poet, writer, and performer. She's the author of two chapbooks, Ruby True and Belinda and Her Friends, and three full-length poetry collections, Knuckle Tattoos, Retrograde, and Birthdays Before and After. Her band, Puma Pearl and Friends, brings spoken word together with rock and roll and has been performing together since 2012. She's received 3 awards from the New York Press Association in recognition of her journalism and was the recipient of the 2016 Acker Award in the category of writing. In May of 2021, she curated and performed in 4 shows as part of the How Happening Artist in Residence program. In 2022, she was honored to read at the Whitney Biennial, New York City. Authenticity, clarity, strength of line, vivid observations are some of the things I see in Puma Pearl's vibrant poetry. Here's a brilliant poet, Puma Pearl.
Thank you so much, and it's nice to be back. I'm going to start. I know I'm reading to you guys in California, so I will start with a Lower East Side poem called LES, Past and Pandemic. I was a child of 10th Street. Police slacks in bodegas, open hydrants, rooftops, cerveza on credit. We were poor and tough, and we might have seemed hard. But if a child stumbled over a crack in the sidewalk, 100 hands reached out to break his fall. In the streets, on the stoops, under tenement skies, we were always home. Everywhere was home. I was a child of 7th Street. Tompkins Square Park was our front yard. Handball and Latin nights, rock shows on the bandshell, late nights on the benches. In the mornings, we cleared the sound boxes of syringes and cookers so the kids could play, chasing each other past the wooden seesaws and the metal swings. The strip, the basketballs, the hills along 9th Street. I got the tea that killed Bruce Lee at the entrance. The park was home. I was a child of 3rd Street, the New Eureka Poets Cafe, where I learned how words could feel. Lines for cocaine and welfare cheese, heroin and poetry. Presidential 357 baskets flowed from 5th floor windows, hands reaching out of grates. Abandoned buildings waiting for developers. Kids sleeping under Star Wars sheets. 3 eggs for Thanksgiving, Bacardi for Christmas. The streets were home. Down here in the lower, below Delancey, below ground, I am no longer a child. The sun rises in my window. Diva the Wonder Dog and I walked along the East River some days, or maybe along South Street. Now and then a longer journey across Houston. And I am home. I am home with keys and a couch and books and television, empty highways and ferries below my window. I am home, but in those pandemic times, I felt homeless. My 10th Street days flood my memory and remind me that everywhere is home. Stoops and streets and rivers and tenement skies. We are always home. Looking back at first world behavior in the apocalypse, it was all about improvisation. My shades fell down. I tucked ruffled checkered pillowcases into the windowsills. A ghetto Scarlett O'Hara. My left hearing aid broke. I put the phone on speaker and used earbuds. The only one I talked to at length, 3-dimensionally, was the dog. Reckless at a younger age than planned. I started to get used to masks. It was hard to breathe. Glass is always foggy, hard to see, hard to hear, but you get used to it. I experimented with dish soap and eyeglass sprays, left the house regularly without them, and I seemed to see just as well as before. Salons were closed. I cut and dyed my hair, tweezed my eyebrows, filed my nails. All that stuff I never did anyway back in the days of cutting real needs into halves and quarters. I burned out 5 car batteries because I had no place to go. My apartment walls are dingy and my intercom rings at night. The elevator's always breaking because the delivery guys block the doors on each side. Amazon boxes line the hallways. There are fewer deaths and more arguments. And it continues. First world problems in the apocalypse. This next one is called In the Realm of No Senses. Darkness gripped the city. Locked in by fear, grief, and helplessness, those quarantine days were simple. Stay safe, we'd say. Protect your loved ones. It was quiet, except for the sirens. No cars or trucks on the highways. Empty sidewalks, air slowly clearing. Today, the noise and traffic have returned. The garbage is piled up in the gutters where people dine and drink. Masks are sometimes worn, sometimes not. We walk to the river, me and Diva. A man sits on a bench singing a bolero into his phone. He wears an embroidered shirt and a Panama hat. His right foot rests on the grate. He faces the water, and I imagine he's singing to a beautiful Spanish woman across the sea, a song he wrote just for her. And I want to believe that she is smiling on the other side of the world. I want to believe in love. Did those weeks lived in the realm of no senses, talking without lips in the absence of touch, twist our hearts forever? Today, we hear each other's pain. We grieve collectively in a world of forbidden hugs and close contact outside of designated bubbles. We sit in parks and listen to men in Panama hats sing to their lovers. This one's called What Kind of World? My new genre is called annoyance poetry. Because the world is so annoying, or because I'm so annoying? Because UPS makes me wait all day for a package that must be signed for, and then drops it in front of my door without even ringing the doorbell. And when I finally discover it, I take the dog to the dog park, and after her ball rolls under the fence, somebody pockets it and walks away before I even have time to get it. And they saw that ball roll under the fence, and the UPS guy saw my doorbell, and the girl who let her unleashed dog charge at us saw me perfectly well, but did not apologize, just picked up her yappy dog and walked away. And that's how it is in the park, where we are missing even more trees. And the trees they cut down this week have nothing to do with flood lines. And the larger park is leveled and looks post-nuclear, and also like a Ukraine town after the citizens' bodies have been cleared away or thrown into mass graves. What kind of fucking world did we fight so hard to survive for? And I am sorry for this annoying poem that is not even a rant or a cry in the darkness. It's just a whine. I am whining about UPS and rudeness and the theft of the dog's ball, while trees and bodies fall and fall and fall, and Zelensky's words become social media memes. What kind of world? This one is called Don't Ask. It only takes a few seconds to crash a car, lose a friend, ignite a fire, spit out words that you'll regret forever. Just a few hours can kill a plant, wreck a marriage, run down a car battery. One bad moment can kill a whole night. In recovery meetings, they say, start your day again. That concept never worked for me. Time doesn't ask permission. And these viral months have propelled us into territories we never thought we'd see. I got old this year, said my friend, but we still have a little bit of fun. I catch myself remembering the lasts, the Cafe Bohemia show, the good Thai food, the bad Broadway play, the hug. Will we be back on stage with music, art, and silliness? Will I return to Prague? Will I love another dog? Sometimes I'm sad. Sometimes I look forward to the nothingness. Thinking is a struggle. Unthinking is leaving the toaster on and placing the cooked salmon in the cabinet. I'm often close to finding one perfect moment and 2 breaths away from the ceiling falling down. This is called Love Me Red. Cruising and playing the radio with no particular place to go. Chuck Berry. Every morning, I sit on the edge of the bed, committing myself to the next moment. Once my feet hit the floor, I can't turn back. Almost against my will, I spin into motion. Chuck Berry's riding along in his automobile, and me, I check my email, do the Times mini puzzle, pour coffee into the MoMA 2001 cup, fill the blue bucket, wash the floors, talk to the geranium, shower and dress. Routines that keep me safe around open windows. My friends who sheltered at home without bras and zippers, walking their dogs in pajama pants and slippers are my heroes, warding off despair without makeup or haircuts. My pandemic supplies included 4 bottles of black eyeliner, 3 shades of hair dye, and lipsticks called Love Me Red and Hot Cherry. I didn't care if they stained my masks. It was less about vanity than survival instincts. Doing whatever I could to face the mirror, even with no particular place to go, and nobody riding shotgun beside the wheel. Living the fantasy. Diva always smiled in the morning. She'd throw her paw over my arm and gaze into my eyes. She looked like a love cartoon, stars and hearts sparkling around her little head. I'd ask dog questions as I opened the curtains and raised the shades. Who's a good girl? Who's the best doggy in the world? She'd tolerate my chatter, wait patiently for me to pick her up, set her on the floor, fill her bowl with kibbles and chicken. We were out to Coney Island almost every weekend. Diva made sure the waves did not touch her feet as she surveyed the sand for any food scraps left behind. Once, I pulled a live mouse from her mouth by its tail. Sometimes I pick Louie up in Clinton Hill. I've taken him to Coney Island since before he was born. The beach is in his blood, and the sea air helped him breathe again. Louie's mask had "Fuck the World" written in the corner. Mine were usually skulls and roses. We pulled them down when we reached the sound. The 3 of us walked quietly, stepping in each other's shadows. Sometimes Diva even ran a little bit. She'd chase a stick, but she'd never bring it back. After our walk, we'd sit on the bench, Diva curled up at our feet, talk about what we miss most. Dinners at Veselka, pedicures, Yankee games. Life, as we'd known it, even the mundane, felt like fantasy. On the way back, Diva would snore in the back seat, and all I asked was for her to make it through 2020 and for my son to leave the virus behind. Just after Valentine's Day, 2021, Louie, Diva, and I shared the last meal of dumpling soup and chicken cutlets. The following day, she huddled in the corner, head to the wall, until we wrapped her in blankets and carried her to the vet. I haven't been to Coney Island yet this year. Life outside my window is restless and bursting to continue. But one day soon, I'll pick Louie up in Clinton Hill, turn the radio up, trying to drown out the backseat silence, Diva's imprint still alive on the stained car cushions. This is called My Kids Still Call Me Mommy. My kids still call me Mommy, even though they're old enough to have kids of their own, which they say they never will. Maybe it's because I wasn't a good mother. We ate chicken wings and pizza for dinner and Crunch and Munch for dessert. I had too many boyfriends and too little money. There were dishes in the sink and dirty laundry in the corners, and beds stayed unmade for days. I left my mother's house knowing nothing. I couldn't even boil an egg. My mother wouldn't let me near the stove because of her stated belief that I was retarded and would probably burn the house down. When I earned a master's degree with honors, my aunt exclaimed, "You're not stupid. Your mother always said you were stupid." I've never become a chef or a housekeeper. My son invented a way to make crepe Suzettes using Entenmann's donut crumbs when he was 6. He became a great cook. My daughter's aunts taught her how to make paneer. Her apartment is always spotless. I like babies and dogs more than adults, but I'm okay with never having grandchildren. I might have to bake and go to children's movies. At least that's how I picture it. We would need traditions. We never had traditions. In many ways, my kids raised themselves, so they might not want to raise anyone else, except cats and dogs. But I never called them stupid, and they still call me Mommy. Okay, and I guess this one is the last one. It's called Apologies to the Dog. Last night, I apologized to the dog. "You're stuck with me," I said. "I'm sorry, Faye." "But she loves you," people respond when I tell them that I apologize to the dog. Well, of course she loves me. What choice does she have? I'm her everything. "I'm sorry I'm your everything, Faye." Poor Faye. Maybe she still dreams of Mexico and the yard and patio in her rescue home, of life before harnesses, leashes, and elevators, of her savior, Eula, who called her gordita and threw her pork slices, and never told her to lose 5 pounds like my vet did when we stood her on the scale like a reality star of my 600-pound life. We play ball on concrete in the shadow of cranes and trucks. We've watched city workers kill the cherry trees, the shade, and the oxygen. On hot afternoons, she lies down beneath benches and scaffolding. She's patient about learning stupid tricks and lifts her paw high in the air for a treat, catches balls in her mouth like a circus dog. When left alone, she scratches at the door exactly 3 times, then sighs and goes to sleep in her little Snoopy bed. I'm sorry, Faye. I'm sorry I don't have grandchildren to play with you in the backyard where you all could run. I'm sorry for my moods and my age and my limited income, and for the rats in the street and the squirrels and the remaining trees who call to you but remain as elusive as the sky. And for the strangers who try to pet you when you just want a little bit of space. I'm sorry that everyone thinks you're so lucky saved by Americans. You wag your tail furiously when you hear Eula's voice on the phone. And if you could talk, you might explain that actually you are quite content in Mexico, just like Giovanni's Nikki Rosa, in ways most people don't understand. I'm sorry, Faye, but you are stuck with me, and whatever is left in this place we call America. Thank you.
Thank you, Puma, for that wonderful reading. I always love the candor and the vitality and the personal writing in your poetry. I always, we live in a time of mass media, so it's always great for me to see a person write about, in this case, her individuality and her landscape. I just have a couple of questions to you. Where were you born and where were you raised, and what do you do every day?
I was born and raised in Brooklyn, and then I raised myself on the Lower East Side. What do I do every day? Well, I adopted this rescue dog at the end of February, and I'm kind of obsessed with the dog. Like I take it to the park to play ball like 4 times a day. So the rest of my day is really centered around that. I still have some shows with my band, so we do that, and I do a little bit of writing here and there, and I do some poetry readings, but that's usually at night. The day is the dog, the night is maybe some art, which is why I'm so pale. I've been to the beach once.
How old were you when you moved to the Lower East Side?
Around 17.
17. Michael, do you have anything you would like to say to Puma? I know you're a New Jersey, New York guy, Massachusetts.
But yeah, I'm a big fan of Puma's, as she knows. And I love her work and I identify a lot with it. The idea of annoyance poetry has been part of my life since the late 1950s when I first started reading or performing my poetry in coffee houses and bars, including in Manhattan in those days, in the Village and East Village and Lower East Side. So I'm a denizen of her milieu, and I always love to hear her read her work because it brings so much more to it in that wonderful voice of hers.
Well, one thing, Puma, I notice you're very active. You're very aware of your own life, and you're also aware of what's going on, talking about the pandemic and what you see, as you walk down the street, or you're just very aware. And I appreciate your awareness and your mindfulness. We probably talked about this before, but talking about poets that you like, who would be one of your or two of your poets that you're interested these days?
I just want to say that I am also a major fan of Michael's, and it's such an honor to read with him. And I have that anthology I bought from you at that show we both did with Eve Brownstein.
Yeah.
And I love that book. I read it over and over. So you're saying, who are my favorite poets at this moment? Like two poets that I've maybe been reading recently? Was that your question?
Yes.
Well, in this last poem that I read, I quoted from a poem by Nikki Giovanni, which was called Nikki Rosa, in which her point was she was asking white people not to judge families because they are poor or large or rural, because they don't understand that really we were quite happy. And I kind of felt that way when I wrote about the dog. Like everyone says, oh, you're such a hero rescuing a dog, when actually she was quite happy. So I think of Nikki Giovanni, who was someone I discovered at a very young age and someone I always go back to. So yeah, so I was reading Nikki again lately, and I was reading poems by my late friend, and maybe your late friend, Michael, Steve Dalachinsky. And, just thinking about how people who are so major in our lives, in our circles, may not even be known in other places, even when they travel, because I'm always surprised when I throw a name out like Steve's, or like recently Pedro Pietri, and I'm talking to poets from another city and they don't know who I mean. So I try to keep those people alive.
You know, one of the reasons I ask both of you every once in a while, you know, how you get hungry to listen to a Bob Dylan tune or a Joni Mitchell, you know, not only for the words, but for the sound. And, you know, you being a New Yorker, and Michael, I know he spent a lot of time in New York as well as California, but being a New Jersey guy, basically growing up, every once in a while you just get hungry. You say, I want to listen to that voice of Puma Pearl, or I want to listen to the voice and poetry of Michael Lally, you know, so that's what I like to do too. It's not just the words on the page. Obviously, when we're gone, that's all there will be. But while we're here and while we have recorded, you know, these are all recorded digitally. So these will be here in the Internet Library, which I'm thankful for MPTF. But it's always a pleasure to hear you, Puma. And, you know, I love your poetry.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So our next poet is going to be Michael Lally. Michael Lally's 30th and most recent book is Another Way to Play, Poems 1960 to 2017. He is the recipient of the Penn Oakland Josephine Miles Award and grants from the NEA. Lally's poetry contains narrative strength, love, sagacity, human, and compassion. A generous and magnificent poet, Michael Lally.
Oh, thanks, Harry. That's a very kind introduction. I'm going to start with a poem that I wrote, dedicate to Eve Branstein, who turned me on to Puma, and a mutual friend of ours. And the poem is called What Was I Thinking? I wrote it shortly after a brain operation in my late 60s, around 2010 or 11 when I wrote it. What was I thinking? I was thinking of Nina Simone. I've been writing poetry and calling myself a poet since I could write. But I first started reading my poems out loud and being proud about what I thought I was doing in 1959. Same year I fell in love with Nina Simone. She used to perform at the then New Village Gate, a nightclub in the basement of a building on the corner of Bleecker and Thompson, with a grating on the Thompson side. I used to lean against while me and my first street partner, known as Destiny to his friends, actually Desiree, but I started calling him Destiny and it stuck. Drank our brown bag bottle to the sound of Nina's piano and voice coming through the grating with the occasional rat. I'd write poems to her on scraps of paper or backs of the flyers for her show and send them in to her through the cat at the door, not knowing if she ever got them since she never responded. And then finally getting enough dust together to pay the cover charge to sit at a table and watch her entrance in a long gown so tight at the ankles. She looked like a Japanese geisha girl walking on thin ice in those odd platform shoes I only knew from the Japanese woodcuts I'd seen in the books, where all my knowledge of art and culture came from then. She was a diva from the start and stole my heart with her mix of classical riffs and self-indulgent exploitation of what she knew best, even if it didn't rest well with my critical musician friends. It was my instrument, those keys to my own survival, as I made a living for a while doing my own versions of Ahmad Jamal and Nina. And yes, I know their styles were exact opposites, but so was I. Now here I am, what seems like 1,000 lifetimes later, having read my poems all over the world, in standing room only university and union halls, nightclubs and churches, radio and TV studios. In my own little way, having my say about what it means to be alive in my times. All I ever did was grab a handful of my books and most recent poems. And it was when it was almost time to get up and read, let my mind organize what I knew was there, and usually it worked. But since someone cut into my skull and touched my brain with their hands and a knife, my spontaneous organizational skills aren't so hot anymore. For the first time, I'm thinking ahead what I might read and wondering if it'll all work, because my head's not so good at organizing now or reading out loud. And then I'm thinking of Nina Simone again. After opening a box full of a CD that's just come out of some old poetry and music sessions, recorded in a funky little studio in Venice, California with my oldest son, Miles, and some of his musician friends in the 90s. And of how she often put off her biggest fans with her grand gestures and demands for a kind of recognition and compensation beyond what she was getting. And how the language I use on this CD must put a lot of people off. Something I knew before, but only wonder now, what was I thinking? Writing language so foul then, feeling left out when the academic awards were handed out. Other times musicians, some well-known like Half the Doors, offered to go into a studio and make music behind my words. And I refused out of some strange sense of the purity of poetry, thinking the music would trivialize it in some ways. But today, thinking maybe that really came out of wanting critics and academics to appreciate what I was doing, what I do with my poetry, that I was sure no one had done before. But hearing these sessions after more than a decade on this CD, I realized how well my words go with some music and how silly I was to turn down all those opportunities. I'm wondering if my post-brain surgery mind that cannot organize things as well as it once compulsively did might make for a bad selection in reading at St. Mark's, the first time post-op. And I thought of Nina Simone again and how in later decades of her life, I fell out of love with her and her music until I read the story of her life and saw how even at the end, when she could no longer sing or play very well, she still showed up, the diva to the last, saying simply by her presence, the queen is here, and that should be enough at this late stage of the game. And I thought, yeah, in my own small way, I have survived a lot, and showing up should be enough, even if I'm not the queen of anything. Whoops. Let's see if I can find my next poem that I think I have here. Besides working with Parkinson's, I'm working with arthritis in this hand mostly. And I wrote a poem about arthritis years ago because some Jersey organization of arthritis doctors asked me to speak at a luncheon of theirs. And I said, I don't give speeches, but I'll write a poem. So I wrote a poem about arthritis, dedicated it to the great poet. Oh my God, see what happens with the brain. John Godfrey, because he's had arthritis for a while. I'm just going to read a little section of it in honor of the Motion Picture Theater and the Motion Picture and Television Foundation that's sponsoring this reading. I thought I'd read about some Hollywood stuff. So this is a stanza from that poem, a long one, because I read long stanzas sometimes. The only encounters I've had with arthritis outside the above were when I made my first movie with a Hollywood star. whose hands were so gnarled they looked like mushrooms grew wild under his pale skin. John Carradine played my character's grandfather and still had the force of all the roles I'd seen him play since I was a boy. As he stared at me from behind the camera while I prepared for my close-up at his supposed deathbed, and the director leaned in to whisper in my ear he'd like to see some tears on my face, then yelled action, and I panicked, thinking I'm not good enough to cry on cue. But John Carradine stared into my eyes with the intensity of his, and as I looked away in search of an alternative, I saw his hands, those knuckles erupting under his skin with fierce independence like an alternative artwork of organic confusion blossoming into fingers that extended in every direction, unaccountably bent and stiffened and askew, and the tears flew from my eyes, much to my surprise, and the rest of the cast and crew, who after a cut was shouted, erupted in spontaneous applause, but none from John Carradine, who couldn't have clapped if he'd wanted to. He just kept looking into my eyes as he nodded his head in approval and smiled slyly. And on the subject of, whoops, that's not the right one. I hate when poets do this, and now I'm doing it. This is a poem I wrote when Susan Hayden, another poetry friend of, I think, Puma's and mine, certainly of Harry's, asked me to write something about Josephine Baker. Josephine Baker. If you had asked me in the 1940s when I was a boy who were the famous women I most admired, I would have said Eleanor Roosevelt and Helen Keller. I had a crush on Veronica Lake, but she was a movie star, and admiration wasn't exactly what I felt for her. If you asked me when I was a boy who Josephine Baker was, I'd have said the lady in the banana skirt, which I knew mainly from the cartoon version of her famous banana skirt dance. By the 1950s, when I was in my teens, I knew who Josephine Baker was. She was a dancer and singer and lived in Paris, and had been part of the French resistance during the war. And when she came back to visit the States, she spoke out against racism and was an activist for civil rights. I absorbed any information about her I could find. And even though I wouldn't have been able to articulate it at the time, if I could have been able, I would have said, I don't want to be Eleanor Roosevelt. I didn't want to be Helen Keller. I didn't want to be Veronica Lake. But I did, somehow in my heart, want to be Josephine Baker. I wanted to be like her. I admired her. I respected her. I looked up to her. I looked at her as one of the models of my young life, how to live a life, how to be alive in the world, how to be a creative being, expressing yourself in all kinds of creative ways, while at the same time fighting for the basic rights of other humans. Man, did I admire her. She was in her 30s when I was born in 1942, and I was in my 30s when she passed in 1975. But she's had a presence in my entire life, right from the beginning. She's been a figure who first I just knew for her notoriety and celebrity, but later, like I said, it was someone I aspired to be like and even be. The fact that she was bisexual something that I came late to expressing, but still before she died, when I was in my late 20s and early 30s, seems equally essential, this being Pride Month when I wrote this poem. And that being one of the least talked about or danced and partied and flag waved about. Because it's confusing to people, which is understandable. That's another thing I loved about her. She didn't give a shit about being confusing to people. She was who she was, and she did what she did with great spirit, great intensity, great savoir-faire, as they say. I think I got that French term right. Yeah, just thinking of Josephine Baker makes me smile. She is the epitome of what it means to live a full life. I adored her as a child and a young man, and I adore her still. And I thank Susan Hayden for allowing my old ass to riff on my reactions to just hearing the name Josephine Baker. Whoops. And then I was asked by Suzanne Loomis, another poet you guys know, I think, LA poet, to take part in an event that talked about the actor Michael Caine. And I said, as I've said in other situations, I can't write a speech about that or an article about it, write a poem about it. So this is a Michael Caine poem. When I was asked to write about Michael Caine, I thought, why not? I've always admired Michael Caine's work as a movie actor, mostly because he never appears to be working at being anything other than Michael Caine, and yet still convinces us, or me, he's whatever character he's playing at being, while still being Michael Caine. Most movie stars as famous and successful as Michael Caine either are unable to let us forget who they are or become their character so completely we forget it's them. But Michael Caine can totally inhabit the roles he plays while never departing from being Michael Caine in ways that we, or at least I, accept without being distracted by it. As for instance, I was by De Niro's weight gain in Raging Bull. It's like Michael Caine is the bridge between the acting through screen charisma movie star performance and a character actor's more self-subsuming presentation of a role, a la Harry. Michael Caine first caught my attention, and most people of the time, was his breakout star turned as Alfie in the movie Alfie. The device of his character breaking the fourth wall to directly address the movie audience. And doing it with a working class lug's arrogant bluntness seemed extraordinarily fresh in both senses of that word then. My mother would always say, don't be so fresh. Michael Caine became a name at the top of that movie's fans' favorite actors lists, including mine, which reminds me of the Divine Comedy. You may be thinking, what has Dante to do with Michael Caine? Well, it was said that Dante was the first great poet to use, or at least popularize, the use of vernacular Italian, as opposed to the classical Latin still used in writing then. Supposedly, the illiterate peasants of that time, the 1300s, could recite lines from the comedy Divine was added later, just from hearing it read because it was written in language they used and could understand. And again, you may ask, what's all this got to do with Michael Caine? Well, some of my Irish ancestors were peasants, as were some of Michael Caine's, including some grand and great-grandparents, and they could sling the vernacular with the best of them. And growing up in a predominantly Irish working-class neighborhood, the vernacular was my milieu. And again, you may be asking, what about Michael Caine? Or you may already see it coming. And I perceive Michael Caine as a master of what I'm calling vernacular movie acting, the progenitor of which was Humphrey Bogart, who was a hero of and moving acting inspiration for Michael Caine. Only Bogey came from cultured, successfully middle and upper class Manhattan roots, while Michael Caine came from working class, at times poor people, so knew well what time it was when he got to be a movie star and was offered roles in movies that at the times were pretty bad, but paid for a new home or lifestyle, as it began to be called around the time Michael Caine became as famous as Bogey in his prime, only, in my humble opinion, more in line with the comedy and the Divine Comedy, which back when Donnie was writing it meant a story in which the protagonist starts out fucked and ends up very unfucked. In other words, the original classic Hollywood happy ending, as in the life of Michael Caine. The vernacular is embedded in every performance of Michael Caine's. Whether the role is working class or posh, it's in the very musculature of his acting. He can't make a move on film that doesn't come across as totally authentic, even ordinary, yet perfectly attuned to the unfolding of the story. I've heard stories of Michael Caine being rude at Hollywood parties back in the day, but I don't put much credence in what others say about scenes I didn't experience firsthand. Because as any truly adult person knows, we all perceive reality from our personal perspective. And usually that varies from the perspective of others. Except on those rare occasions where an entire gang or crowd or audience or arena full of fans shares a singular sensation created by an artist's work, whether the art is cricket or filmmaking, as in moviegoers reacting to Michael Caine in Alfie, or The Man Who Would Be King, or Educating Rita, or Hannah and Her Sisters, or Mona Lisa, or Little Voice, or Dress to Kill, which I was in too. Not many people know that. You and me may not agree with Michael Caine's politics, or with my interpretation of Michael Caine's film acting as vernacular, but there's no denying his success at retaining his original South London working class accent in movies, making it not just acceptable where it hadn't been, which is the way I see my poetry, but that's for others to decide. Like the working class Liverpool accent of the Beatles, who found success around the same time as Michael Caine during the swinging part of the 60s. But making the posh Brits take a few hits from the power of the vernacular to even out and from time to time overturn the playing field. Oh, Michael Caine, we pray you always retain your working class accent and cachet and stay the same unrestrained exemplar of the kind of grounded in authenticity acting we love. And above all else, Maurice Joseph Micklewhite Jr., please always remain Michael Caine. Well, that went a little longer. I do go on, don't I? Let me see what else I had lined up here. I'm going to try and find just a couple more. I have a little trouble from my Parkinson's, and this is a poem I wrote about that not too long ago. It's my new favorite poem of mine. It's called I Meant To. I meant to put those 63 names and email addresses in the BCC blind copy space, not the CC copy space. I meant to send it to him, not her. I meant to swallow, not drool, on a computer. The drooling is why I'm chewing gum. My neurologist suggested it does help a little. I meant to swallow, not drool, on the computer, my lap, your sleeve, my arm, the floor, that first edition in the drawer. I meant to walk and move with that feline grace someone once said I had, not wobble and staggered like an old wino. I meant to hit the Y, not the T, the H, not the G, the B, not the V, return, not send, amends, not amen. I meant to stand up straight, not bend, to sit upright, not slouch, to not fall down and get stuck between the couch and a hot pipe that burned my back like the prolonged sting of a fierce slap. I meant to stay 29 or 49, not be 79, turning 80 in May, this past May, this way, drooling and stumbling and unable to make a fist with my right hand or grasp a utensil in the proper way, but instead need foam additions to the handles for my one or two fingers that can still curl without help. I meant to be the exception to obviously aging or a long gone legend by now, not a bent over drooling old man who still often feels like a woman inside. But I'll accept what I'm left with for as long as I can and still be grateful for all that I've been and am. I'll end with this. In my life, I've been heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, trisexual, pansexual, transsexual, multisexual, omnisexual, prosexual, antisexual, hypersexual, unisexual, unsexual, soulsexual, osexual, protosexual, neurosexual, social sexual, spiritual sexual, emosexual, psychosexual, self-sexual, fantasy sexual, photosexual, butch sexual, femsexual, gender-bending sexual, joy sexual, sad sexual, lull sexual, sob sexual, morning sexual, night sexual, daytime sexual, memory sexual, nostalgic sexual, not nostalgic sexual, sensual sexual, poet sexual, actor sexual, movie sexual, model sexual, private sexual, public sexual, computer sexual, phone sexual, polymorphous perverse sexual, page sexual, screen sexual, old sexual, young sexual, hard sexual, soft sexual, tough sexual, gentle sexual, permasexual, avant sexual, rad sexual, the shit sexual, sun sexual, moon sexual, star sexual, superstar sexual, ultrasexual, egosexual, selfless sexual, God sexual, people sexual, me sexual, she sexual, he sexual, they sexual, them sexual, queer sexual, real sexual. It's complicated.
That was very wonderful. I'm always touched by your poetry, your honesty, your awareness, your compassion, and I've said this to you before, you set up almost a horizontal infinity sign between you and the reader, and you just capture the reader and draw the reader in, and we live through you. And I love the poem about Michael Caine. You have such great life spirit in you, and I've known you for many years, and you just have such a strength of narrative. Your narrative just keeps unraveling, and you've always touched me with your writing and your honesty, and Thank you very much. Puma, would you like to say anything to Michael? We have about 2 minutes left.
Oh, I just loved the reading. I loved every moment of the reading. It was absolutely wonderful, Michael. And it's so great to see you again, even virtually. I don't think I have seen you in 3 years. So,
And I moved to upstate New York to live with my older boy and his partner, Hannah, so that they can help me in my troubles. Harry, people often ask me when I say poetry saved my life for an example, and one example is recovering from an operation. I was in a deep depression.
Well, my heart's with you,
And
Michael.
you sent me your book, Reunions, and it brought me back to life. Brought me back to life.
wow. Amazing.
Amen.
I also follow everything you write on Facebook about the film reviews, and I really enjoy reading all of those posts.
Thanks, Puma. Thank you for your work.
Well, you're both great, and it's 2:00, and television waits for no man or no woman, and Jennifer Clymer here is ready to go on to her next show. So I want to thank you both. You always inspire me. And Jennifer, thank you once again for taking care of us all.
Thank you, everybody.
And thank you for inviting me again, Harry.
Please come back again soon.
Wish I could in person.
Us too.